So the digital age after Cambridge Analytica. It all started very nicely, I think. We did more and more work with data that was becoming eventually available about our society, what's happening around us, and I'm just reporting about some of the work that we've done ourselves. Of course, there's much more to be reported in the world of data science, but I think we don't have so much time. So basically, let me just mention pedestrian modeling and traffic physics, which benefited from a lot of data, and also epidemic spreading has been understood much better by the availability of data. So if you look at how epidemics spread, basically just imagine a globe, and whenever somebody gets the flu, it blinks on this globe, and you're looking at the spatial temporal pattern of flu spreading, and you get basically this kind of data, and you see it's very widely scattered. And the reason for this is that we don't have a diffusive process over here as the simulation shows, but instead we also have long distance travel, and that long distance travel basically messes up the pattern and makes things very badly predictable. However, if you now combine data of the travel volume of passengers from one airport to another airport throughout the world, then basically you can define a new effective distance. And within this effective distance, suddenly the spreading pattern becomes circular, and you can identify the origin of the disease. You can also predict the likely cities that will be hit by the flu wave next. So you can take preparations, you can take proactive measures, and you can see now things are really much more predictable. A similar thing can be done actually with the spreading of various of kinds of diseases, as you see over here. And it can be used also to predict possible imports of very bad diseases, to prepare and also not fall into panic. You can analyze spreading patterns of scientific activities, new ideas. Where do they originate? Where are they consumed? You can even look into scientific memes, right? For example, here in physics, we see what are kind of the top research fields over time. And you see Kondo effect, you see graphite, you see quantum wells, Hubbard model, quantum hole, Bose-Einstein, neutrino quarks, nanotubes, entanglement, graphene, and so on and so on. You can also look into cultural spreading over thousands of years, just looking into the birth and death places of famous individuals. And based on this data, you can also look into how America was discovered, in a sense, right? So you can see people arrived at the East Coast and eventually explored the country to arrive at the West Coast. Not everyone, of course, but as there's such a nice weather, good for paintings, a lot of people will be spending their life over there. We've also been looking into the migration of professionals, the migration of refugees, the spreading of international tension. And the next thing I'm presenting is work of colleagues, Frank Schweitzer and others, who have been looking into the spread of the financial crisis when Lehman Brothers went bankrupt. And you can see there are hundreds of banks that are failing, and it causes losses of hundreds of billions of dollars, unfortunately. Now, in the meantime, of course, we are living in a time of big data, and within just a minute, 700,000 Google queries are being sent, 500,000 Facebook posts, and as you go shopping, as you move around, that creates data traces, and all of that adds to the heap or sea of big data. And the dream came up that Chris Anderson formulated, which was the end of theory. The data deluge makes the scientific method obsolete. That was his prediction. And so basically scientists would not be needed any longer, and the dream came up that we could know everything. We can now understand the human body, brain, and personality. And it ended up with statements such as the one by Stephen Wolfram, who said that humans are more predictable than elementary particles. Forget about humans, in other words. Of course, I couldn't disagree more, but anyway, now we know how the story ended. The previous success stories of big data analytics, such as Google Flu Trends, are now taken offline, as you know, and there are many more examples that I could show that this brute force big data analytics approach often doesn't do the job well enough, and that finally scientists come back into the game, because anyway there's more data than you can ever process. You need to know what data to look at and in what ways, and that requires special skills. And this is why you're sitting here, right? Now I'd like to ask you, what do you think? How much and what kind of data is available about us? Just come on, tell me something.
Too much.
Yeah, but what can we do about it? Anyway, just to scan through some of the data that's being collected. When you go shopping, data is being collected. 4 data points are enough to identify people with 90% accuracy. As you know, then Google and others are collecting data about your mobility. Even if you switch it off, Facebook is collecting your social contacts. Even if you're not a Facebook member, then you may store files at Dropbox or in the cloud. You may have a Gmail account. Who has a Gmail account over here? See, I mean, they're scanning through emails in order to figure out what is the best advertisement for you, what you need to know about the world. Who has this kind of device? Kindle readers. So, you know, while you think you're reading books, this device is reading you. I mean, what kind of books you're interested in, what comments you're making, how much time you spend on each page, you know, all that. So, yeah, it's a reader for humans, right? Google, of course, is reading your mind in a sense. Siri is listening into your conversations, and of course, somebody is analyzing Google. In fact, what you're watching on the internet, if you were using such a Google Glass, then also they could see what's happening around you. Can also see it with the camera of your smartphone, of course, in principle. If you have such kind of game consoles at home, then it's also watching your living room. If you have a smart TV, who has a smart TV over here? No? Who has a TV? Okay. It may be smarter than you think, though.
Yeah.
If you have these bots to clean up your room, then it's basically measuring your apartment and reporting data to whomever. And if you have this kind of smoke detectors, and some of them apparently are equipped with cameras, who has such a smoke detector in the sleeping room, maybe even.
Small keys here. Are they mandatory?
They are mandatory.
Not a camera version.
No.
Well, but you cannot check, you know, what's going on. In my rented apartment, I have these smoke detectors that I cannot even deactivate, because it would give an alert immediately to the landlord, and so nobody knows exactly what they're measuring. Anyway, then also autonomous cars, right? Some of them use a lot of cameras. They could basically apply face recognition and record everything that's happening on the streets in a city. And so we are heading towards a time where drivers, if they still drive anyway, are very transparent. Your car is measuring your weight and what you eat and is reporting also most likely to your health insurance. Yes.
Have you looked at like a user's manual for a Mercedes car? Because it kind of gives an insight into the sorts of sensors that are on the car and how they might be used into to diagnose an accident situation, something like that, about how fast you were going when you braked and that sort of thing. So all of this is in a sense like they're upfront about it, but probably maybe not upfront about every single thing.
It seems like a single of these modern cars is collecting more than a terabyte of data each day. So just to give you an idea. Then, why not collect also your fingerprints and your genetic materials, the DNA, and find out what's happening in your body with pills which release basically nano sensors, and then eventually Watson of IBM would evaluate data of Apple devices. I'm not sure you were aware of this, to figure out about your health status. If you read news on the internet, then 10, 20 companies are tracking what you're interested in. And if you're in social media, there are companies like Axon Global that you may not have heard about yet, collecting data of 64,000 social media providers. Facebook and Twitter are just two of them. Yeah, so if you thought you had a platform that nobody was interested in, very unlikely. Then also, this is what was reported just, I think, yesterday. Basically, your apps are spying on you and they're reporting us. They're selling this data. One of the famous examples is the flashlight app. Of course, in order to activate the flashlight on your smartphone, you don't need any data, but it's collecting all sorts of data that's in your smartphone's memory and reporting it to whomever. So basically, then there are backdoors, and it turns out it was possible to read what you were typing in the past years, and of course, this data is revealing everything. In particular, it's possible to determine your psychology from the way you talk. Can you maybe close the doors? And the NSA is capable of identifying your location based on your voice profile. So whenever you start talking and they're interested in you, they can identify your location, what you're saying, whom you're talking to. So as every human is just speaking about 6,000 words a day, it wouldn't be too difficult to record everything that everyone on this planet is saying, and to basically use AI in order to transcribe it into text and analyze all the words that you're saying and so on. So now Google is turning the camera into a browser, and then basically you can also read faces and basically whether you tell the truth or not, and it's possible to identify your heartbeat in a distance because the color of your skin would just slightly change. We wouldn't notice with our eyes, but cameras can do this. And so no wonder they're also trying to read our brain waves from a distance. Not sure how good they are in this, but they're certainly making progress over here. So basically, there are digital doubles about you, which are highly detailed about your economic activities, your buying, your consumption patterns, your income, your age, your health, your social network, and we'll find out also your psychology. So Google CEO said, we know where you are, we know where you've been, we can more or less know what you're thinking about. And some years back, CIA Director Gus Hunt said, you're already a walking sensor platform, and it's really very nearly within our grasp to be able to compute on all human-generated information, which is what I reported about, and probably still much more. So we're entering a new world, and so it seems like there's a new currency. Data is the new oil. In fact, many IT companies are more valuable now than oil companies, but not only the financial system is changing, but also the legal system. Code is law, so algorithms are determining more and more what can be done and what not in our lives. And this is also in our private lives, and so basically this is bypassing our parliaments, this is bypassing democracy. Now we have these pre-crime programs that turn everyone into a suspect. Very dangerous in the over-regulated society, because everyone would make mistakes. They would send you a ticket if they like, or they could even imprison you if they liked, right? It goes so far that there's even a karma police program, right? Which is not only assessing what you've been doing wrong, but also assessing your value to society. Considering what movies you're watching, what music you're playing, and all these kind of things. Any idea what your karma points are, what they're doing with it? Also in the Netherlands, there's citizen score, and I would think it probably exists everywhere, but they're not talking much about it. The problem, of course, is even though we would like to get rid of crime, it's much less clear what's really good and bad for society. For example, innovation is questioning established standards. Is it good or bad? Then in any case, there's machine bias, there's discrimination, and also there are mistakes. So, for example, in China, there was an ad on a bus, and that famous star was getting a ticket basically because the system thought she had crossed a red light. It was just an ad, right? Okay, then there's a new economy, the attention economies. So basically, our attention is the scarce resource. It's being sold on the market. Who gets access to your attention, or who can manipulate your thinking. And so we've entered a new political system where something like a digital scepter, and this is called nudging, and it's being used in order to more efficiently rule the world. That means you, basically, right? And how does it work? So basically everyone is being profiled and targeted, all of you. Apparently, they collect about every one of us every day, say, gigabits of data, it seems. And this is quite a lot of data, of course. Every day, as I said, for every person. And so there are companies that know better what you think than your friends, your family, and so on. That kind of data is partially even accessible to you. So there are companies such as Crystal Knows that offers to see anyone's personality and with that kind of information, it's easy to manipulate people's attention with personalized information that's tailored just to you, and you would feel very comfortable about it. You would think, oh, this was my idea, but in fact it was basically triggered through certain kind of keywords and so on. And they're using the fact that there are a lot of cognitive biases. Our brain is running on just 100 watts, very little energy as compared to a Google AI that requires as much energy than an entire city. So our brain makes simplifications, and that's why we have these cognitive biases, and they have been measured, and also how to use them to trick people, and it can be done through algorithms, and basically for each bias there's a trick that has been algorithmically coded, something that Snowden has revealed, and it's not just being applied to bad people, enemy combatant or whatever, or spies of foreign nations. This is being applied to all of us, hundreds of millions of people in parallel, and that's the outcome. And if you don't believe it, then you should listen to this TED Talk of Tristan Harris, who has been working in one of the Google control rooms, and he explains how a handful of tech companies controls billions of minds every day. These are your minds. Right? So in fact, people have figured out how to program people, how to rule the world, how to remotely control society. And so the idea came up, could we now run society like a giant machine? And for this we would need to know what are the different pieces and how they behave and how they can be controlled, and now you know how to do that, basically. And that's also why Putin told us the leader in AI will be ruling the world. The question is just who is going to be it, Any guesses? China, maybe, yeah. So it's interesting to see what they're doing with AI, and then it turns out they're also applying that citizen score besides mass surveillance, of course, and basically everything people do or don't do gets plus or minus points in those test cities. Basically, if you cross a road when there's a red light, you get minus points. If you pay your rent a few days later, you'll get minus points. If you don't visit your grandmother frequently enough, you get minus points. If you read critical news, will get minus points. If you have friends who read critical political news, will get minus points, and so on. And then you have the citizen score, and it determines what kind of jobs you can get, what countries you can travel to, how much you have to pay for your loan, how fast is your internet, and whether you can still use fast trains or public transport. So basically this is totalitarian control, technological totalitarianism. And it could also pop up in our countries anytime if we don't pay attention, because technology is there.
Just as a consideration, is it a sustainable system? We have seen totalitarian systems.
Yeah, maybe not for 1,000 years, but the question is, would you want to risk such an experience? I would consider it the last period of history and last period of lifetime. I don't want to go through this period just to learn a lesson that we know already how it will end, So just skip it, Let's be smart.
Do we have an option?
Yes, and I'll talk about it. And there's more in the pipeline, right? Internet of Things is now spreading great opportunities. It's of course creating a hell lot of data, so we need much better communication bandwidth. This is happening. It's called Li-Fi, not just 5G. Li-Fi is much bigger. A single LED is producing kind of 8 gigabits per second of bandwidths, and you could have thousands of them, satellites for this. So basically, the lights in your offices might at the same time be communication devices, and that kind of data will be fed into quantum computers, and of course it's military organizations, but also, as you can see, companies like Volkswagen that are actually investing into this in order to manage or control mobility all over Germany or Europe or the entire world. But if you control mobility, you also have basically controlled much of society, and also other companies, the usual suspects, are involved in this. Now it goes further. There is a BRAIN initiative which is funded with several $billions, and it is using nanoscience and nanotechnology to provide a rich toolkit of novel methods to explore brain function by enabling simultaneous measurement and manipulation of activity of thousands or even millions of neurons. And so this is where we are heading. And then if you look into projections of how much data is being collected, and it used to be 12, data was doubling every 12 months, but it will be soon every 12 hours. And why is this? Because of human brain indexing. So basically our brains are being indexed. That's what's happening, and then basically the goal is technological telepathy, and it would end up into what some people call neurocapitalism, where you basically can read out brain waves but also write into your brain waves. So who's looking forward to this? Nobody. Come on, don't be so conservative. Okay, political perspectives. People are worried about the future of democracy. The high-level German politicians probably have heard politicians in other countries saying similar stuff. So yes, this kind of technology is undermining democracy the way it's being used, but also business leaders are getting concerned, right? Like Tim Cook is actually criticizing Google and Facebook for their manipulation. Also, Larry Page of Google was saying, I don't think that a democracy can work if your government collects data and doesn't tell you what they're doing. Are they telling us? Is our democracy working? So now the question is, what he's saying about companies. So we need access to the data of our users in order to be able to tell exactly what they are doing, and basically present to them the right kind of fitting advertisement. Said the people of the telecommunication companies in Europe, and Larry Page said they are crazy. Sean Parker was a manager at Facebook. He says that the company exploits the vulnerability in human psychology. These have been also people who established WhatsApp, also part of Facebook, and now they criticize that they have been sold the private sphere of their users. Apple now says they have decided to collect as little data as possible, whatever that means. George Soros was even warning of the end of civilization in connection with what was going on with Cambridge Analytica and so on. They manipulated elections in various countries. Eventually they had to close down. But they were basically using military mind control technology to do that. So no wonder we're now seeing a tech lash. Right? Many people are starting to criticize what these companies are doing. They're being questioned by Congress and by the European Parliament and so on. Amazon has lost 200 billions within a few days, and the big 5 tech companies have been pulling down the financial markets and lost $1 trillion so far, and that's quite a bit of money, right? Even the World Economic Forum now gets concerned. People are losing trust into the system, and they should have thought about it before. They thought probably they were in control, and it turns out they are not in control to the extent that they hoped they would be. And so basically we're at the point where we need to rethink the system. I'm not an enemy at all of the digital revolution and technology. I just say we need to use it in a better way. And here is what I think how we should be using it. First of all, we really need to learn how to use that technology for a digital evolution of our society, right? Not just products and services and consumption patterns. Basically, we have to digitally upgrade our democracy and also capitalism and address the challenges that humanity is faced with, and that hasn't happened really to the extent it should have been happening. Now we need to learn how to engineer a more responsible digital future. So the PhD program in Delft was already mentioned. Farsam actually is one of the PhD students. He's with us here today. And you see the World Economic Forum was posting this article by me. In fact, the IEEE has already spent quite a bit of work on trying to establish standards on AI, ethically aligned design, as they call it. The European Commission has published this statement on artificial intelligence, robotics, and autonomous systems, where they're also trying to establish a framework, a value-based framework. In Germany, there's also a discussion about value-oriented design. So basically, what is really important to realize is that for society to thrive, many different values matter. Maybe in different contexts, but if you just maximize profit or GDP per capita or something like this is one-dimensional thinking, which doesn't work well for a society. There are many things that matter, and we need to learn to design for those values, right? Basically build it into digital platforms as we need it. Then the question is, if you wanted to upgrade democracy, what is it that we need to learn to code? And these are the lessons that we've learned over many hundreds of years of wars and revolutions. So maybe we shouldn't just skip those lessons that we've learned, but rather learn to implement them into digital platforms. I mean, certainly we can discuss any of them, but we need to understand history in order to understand why we implemented these kind of values, and I think they all make a lot of sense, and that's why I listed them here. Human rights, human dignity, freedom, self-determination, pluralism, protection of minorities, division of power, checks and balances, participation, transparency, fairness, justice, legitimacy, autonomous equal votes, privacy in the sense of protection from misuse and exposure, and the right to be left alone. So basically, in an age where code is law, I think algorithms must be made transparent, or should be made transparent. The proposal is to have a protection for 24 months. That would be a commercial period where you make money with your algorithms, but then after some time it would be open sourced, and academic institutions, Chaos Computer Club, all sorts of NGOs could check whether these algorithms have discriminated people or whatever, and give feedback. And that feedback creates a quality control mechanism and eventually an improvement of quality. Besides, also everyone would learn from everyone else, so we would make much faster progress, I think. Then there is one thing that we really need to consider, which is human dignity. And human dignity means that humans are not supposed to be treated like animals, like objects, or like data. Unfortunately, we haven't quantified human dignity. Maybe it's not even possible. So basically, in a data-driven society, you automatically forget about it, right? And so you end up in a situation where you have this wonderful algorithm that's predicting the behavior of, say, elementary particles. CERN, for example, is making these experiments, and you know they're producing so much experimental data they have to throw away 99.9% of all data and process the others, because they could never process all data. And so basically, depending on the experiment, they're looking at those patterns that matter to take certain decisions about what has happened, whether a certain kind of physical mechanism has occurred or not. And so that uses predictive analytics, and it's very powerful. And so the question is, couldn't we use that for other kinds of applications? You know? And you start basically applying it to chicken farms or pig farms, basically, in order to raise them more successfully, avoid panic and all these kind of things. And I say, okay, no, that has worked well. We have adapted to this. Now let's make terrorists, kind of identify terrorists and eliminate terrorism. And then you do that, and the next thing is criminals, and then eventually you say, oh, maybe we could also apply these algorithms to unemployed people, and and eventually, you know, it would be everyone who would be kind of run by these algorithms. And so eventually we have to ask the question, is that appropriate? Or isn't it ending in a situation where people are actually be treated like data and objects or animals, you know? And in fact, some years back we have decided we would not want to live like pigs, and that, you know, that we have decided to distinguish ourselves from objects and animals. Then why are we giving up on this principle? I think we need to re-establish human dignity in the digital age. That can be done by deciding that we should be in control of our personal data, and given that we can assume that all that data that's being collected by those thousands of companies is flowing together in the data archives of secret services, and there is your digital double, and basically you could say put a platform on top that allows you to decide what company or institution would be allowed to use what piece of your personal data for what period of time, what purpose, and maybe what payment. And then basically all the personalized products and services would be possible, but you decide whether you want it or not. Companies would have to get your trust, your agreement to share your data. If you don't approve it, they're not allowed to use it, even if they have it. And so basically there would be a competition for trust, and that would lead to a trusted or trustable digital society. That's the idea. The other advantage would be that then we would have a level playing field. Basically, not just big data companies would have access to your personal data, but NGOs, SMEs, spin-off companies, scientific institutions, everyone would benefit from the treasure of big data. We could all make much better contributions to a better future. How to manage our personal data, because it's so much, you don't want to spend 3 hours a day on this. Well, I guess every one of us would have a digital assistant, basically a personalized AI system that eventually learns your preferences, and so it reconfigures your data and you can say yes or no or adjust it. Now, with such an approach, we would head towards empowering everyone with data, and combinatorial innovation would become possible, and so basically we could really grow information innovation ecosystem where we all benefit from each other, because that is one of the huge potentials of the digital world. It's kind of immaterial as compared to the old material economy, and they're kind of unlimited benefits. So we could live all in an age of prosperity if we wouldn't deal with data as if would be a material limited good. But we need to open up this value for everyone's benefit, because otherwise we'll end in a totalitarian nightmare. The other thing is we need to make sure that we're not eliminating human freedoms, right? I mean, with predictive analytics and automation, it's certainly possible to do that, but would we want this, and would it be good for our society? And so this is the way that many people have been thinking about automation in the past. They would be ending up in a scenario of artificial intelligence taking over the world. So let's assume you or a system would have to decide about a certain action or not, yes or no. And you measure, say, 6 different quantities that can be in favor or against taking that action. I could say, okay, if there are a few criteria speaking in favor, say 1, 2, or 3 criteria speaking in favor of taking that action, you would say, no, don't do that. If 4, 5, or 6 criteria speak in favor of this, then the system would recommend yes, and it would be done. There's no room for freedom over here. But we don't have to run systems like this, right? We could also run the system like this. And let the system figure out what are the clear no cases, like if just 1 or 2 criteria speak in favor, what are clear yes cases, like if 5 or 6 criteria are speaking in favor of this. Well, we could have an area where we admit for human choice, right? Say if 3 or 4 criteria speak in favor, and we're not so entirely sure, is that really yes, is that really no, maybe we should reflect on it. So we could build systems that are semi-automated, but also consider room for free choice, and creativity and innovation, and all these kind of things depend on free choice. So basically, we should build in relevant decision points, right? I don't need to take every single decision all the time, It's fine to have a self-driving car, I think, but if the car starts deciding where I want to go, or the system wants to decide whom I should marry, maybe that's a little bit too much automation, even though that could be done, of course. And so basically the issue here is to identify what are the decision points that matter, where human decision making should be involved, and to leave all the other stuff to automation. So after this, we eventually have to solve the world's existential problems, right? Climate change, financial, economic, and spending crisis, conflict, war, mass migration, terrorism, are all outcomes, I believe, of a much bigger problem, which is lack of sustainability. So we're over consuming renewable resources, and that creates shortages of resources in some places of the world, and that creates conflict, war, mass migration, and so on and so on. You know, so if we want to get rid of those problems, then we need to fix this problem first of all. You know, create livable conditions all over the planet. And this is what this United Nations Agenda 2030 is about. And the question is how to achieve those goals within a short period of time. And so the classic approach is nation states and the United Nations on the one hand, and on the other hand, global corporations, right? And we know it's not enough. It's not going to save all the people on this so-called overpopulated planet. We need to change the organizational framework of this planet. Otherwise, it's going to go terribly wrong. And here is a third pillar, countering global problems bottom up through city Olympics. It would be different disciplines. Every few months, basically, every few years, cities all over the world would engage into friendly competitions over, say, a period of 6 months, like a mega hackathon, which would involve all the societal and economic and political media stakeholders and civil society. There would be different disciplines of competition, for example, mitigate climate change, come up with more energy efficient solutions, improve sustainability, increase resilience, improve peace, solidarity, things like that. And so everyone could be involved, cities would spend some money on this, and then in the end there would be some solutions, and a best of list of those solutions would be created by committees, and then eventually these solutions would be open source and created commons. It means every city could select the solution that fits its budget and its needs in the best way. Moreover, scientific institutions, NGOs, SMEs, big companies, cities, they could combine those different solutions and develop them further, right? So basically, we would combine the best ideas of the entire world to make quick progress. And in fact, in the United States, this idea was already taken up, and the first City Climate Olympics taking place, 70 million was invested into this, and I think we should be doing that all over the world and develop into a serious co-competition activity. And so basically, how to unleash the creativity of the many people on this planet. Well, I think hackathons, fab labs, and maker spaces would play an important role. And in fact, there have been hackathons in the past years. One of my favorite fab lab is actually Dirk in Amsterdam. Many people are visiting the place to see what's going on over there. Hundreds of years old, this building has a historical role. You may know this picture. Who has seen it before? No? So this is part of a bigger picture, which is this. So basically in that building, they have been analyzing how the body works, right? They've been looking into dead bodies, and that kind of thinking is still there. So basically, they have invented the Fairphone over there. I think there's a second or third generation of this Fairphone available right now, very impressive. So it's all about being able to look inside, to understand how it works, to repair it, to upgrade it, to have a more sustainable production and device and I think this is something that could be done in many cities, and we could all learn from this. And in fact, there's been this Nation of Makers initiative, and I think it's still not fully up to speed, but we need to go this way. Because in principle, many institutions, ETH Zurich and your universities most likely too, could work on new solutions like this, a solar car or self-driving car. A single hacker, for example, has come up with this self-driving car, or solar planes, or these kind of city taxis, flying taxis, and so on. And then there are citizen science. In fact, now we have in Zurich, between the University of Zurich and ETH Zurich, new citizen science center, and that also opens up new opportunities, because there's some problems that cannot be solved well with supercomputer power. For example, folding proteins, which is important to discover new drugs to heal diseases, and so on. There's another nice example, which is Openstreetmap. It started at UCL, if I remember well. And now, basically, the entire world is mapped in this system. There are 1 million people feeding data into the system. And that creates one of the most up-to-date street maps, not only this, but also hiking trails and all that is also being fed into the system. I can go a step further and take the pictures that people upload on the web in order to reconstruct cities in 3D, or the entire planet if you want. So all of that's possible. We've also been working on participatory health services for citizens, run by citizens. InfluenzaNet, GrippeNet is the key word. We've been working on responsible consumption apps in our asset project. Vangelis is involved. It's coming to an end. And so this is about consumer-driven responsible consumption, where you can say the price has 40% importance for myself, and maybe environmental friendly production 30%, and socially responsible production 30%. Maybe you have allergies, you can tell that the system would kind of read the codes of the products and go into databases to tell you what is the best product for you according to your personal criteria. That's the idea. And so basically you would get higher quality products, companies would learn what kind of products you would like to have, and so both sides would benefit. Then participatory resilience, what happens in case of a disaster. We can give people devices or apps that help them help themselves and help each other. Apps that can allow you to map these disaster areas, to provide information to everyone, apps that allow people to help each other, like a decentralized sharing economy and all these kind of things. But we could also go a step further and say, let's go into open source urbanism, in particular in developing countries, in countries where you have crisis, refugees and so on, where we need to quickly build new infrastructure together. And so the idea of Wikipedia and Creative Commons and GitHub is being taken further towards open source architecture and open source hardware and open source cities. So basically principles of openness, collaboration, modularity, granularity, and low-cost integration enable such collaborative city building, city development. And it's happening in some cities already. Even in New York City, the previous chief planner, Alexandros Washburn, said, I couldn't control anything, but I could influence everything. And he pointed out that it was very important for the success of urban designs to have the right combination of top-down and the bottom-up involvement. Without bottom-up, it wouldn't work well enough. So basically, we are heading towards a new approach towards globalization, which I'd like to call globalization, which is about thinking global, acting local and diverse, to experiment, to learn from each other, and to help each other. Now I'd like to look a little bit more into complex systems. Right? We are certainly coming from a time where we didn't have enough data to take good decisions, and that has changed with big data. Now we can make evidence-based decision making, but data volume is growing faster than processing power. So increasing percentage of data is dark data that we can never look at. And we need to know what data to look at, in what ways. That requires scientists, as I pointed out before. But moreover, there is a systemic complexity that is growing even faster with the networking of the world than the data volume. It's growing super exponentially in a factorial way. And so paradoxically, even though we have more processing power than ever and more data than ever and best technology ever, we're losing control of this planet. And we need to have a new control paradigm, which is distributed control and self-organization, as I will point out. So in a highly networked world, whatever you do has an impact on other people or institutions or companies, and intended effects will not always happen. You would have side effects, you would have feedback effects and cascading effects. And here is a typical example. All those drivers want to go smoothly, nobody wants to stop, but in fact this is what's happening. Phantom traffic jam, small variations in the speeds are being amplified, and that creates a stop and go traffic that nobody wants. So this is a result of systemic instability, and so the question is what to do about it. My proposal is to go from an approach of top-down control to a culture of empowerment and coordination. And that can be done with the Internet of Things. So I believe that now with the Internet of Things we can make self-organization work 300 years after Adam Smith's invisible hand concept. And in fact, what we've done is we have modeled and simulated traffic, and you can see this traffic simulation of the stop and go traffic that we've seen before in the experiment. It shows you that we understand the process, and eventually we'll take a helicopter to get an overview of what's really going on here. And it turns out that in fact there is an on-ramp where some vehicles try to get on the freeway, produces small disturbances of the flow, which are basically amplified, and that produces the stop and go traffic. Now assume that we would equip, say, 30% of those vehicles with radar sensors that measure distances and relative velocities, and that those cars accelerate and decelerate automatically in a slightly different way. So we activate the traffic assistance system, and as you can see, we get rid of the traffic jam even though the same number of cars are still entering the system as before. This doesn't require a traffic control center. The only thing that we do is we change the interaction mechanism, and that is called mechanism design. How do we do that? Basically, we make real-time measurements, and based on the real-time data, we create a real-time feedback. We change the interactions between those cars, or a certain percentage of those cars, and that stabilizes traffic flows, increases capacity slightly. A similar approach has been developed for cities, where the traffic flows will control the traffic lights rather than the other way around. I mean, traffic lights would become adaptive to the local traffic situation. And if you do that right, then you get those wonderful self-organized green waves. oscillatory flows at the intersections, and it turns out that this decentralized control can outsmart the state-of-the-art centralized control, which much reduced travel times for public transport, somewhat reduced travel times for individualized traffic, and also benefits for pedestrians, cyclists, and the environment. And a similar thing matters more and more for smart grids, where decentralized energy production and intelligent consumption can be decentrally coordinated, and Evangelis is working on this. And also self-organized production is possible now, where basically the products would have chips that would talk to machines, telling them what should be done with them, and also they could talk to the other products and say, hey, I have to overtake because I have to be delivered quickly. Let me pass. And all of that can happen, and so here you can see an example of conveyor belts that are transporting those different packages. And you can see they take the shortest path in the beginning, but if the system becomes more and more busy, then eventually you will get a roundabout traffic flow, a circular flow, all based on self-organization. Now this brings me finally to socio-ecological finance. Within a lifetime, you're producing 50 tons of garbage. This is furniture, cars, computers, smartphones. A lot of this is being thrown away, while this would be enough resources for everyone on this planet. So the problem is we're not using those resources well. That can now be changed with the Internet of Things. We've been working on a concept study, NoticeNet. It's the Internet of Things run as a citizen web. Also, Evangelis was involved, and the idea is to use our smartphones and additional sensors to measure our environment in a privacy conserving way, noise, CO2, and all these different resources that we would throw away, but also positive things like education, health, and the reuse of resources. And so the principle would be to increase positive externalities to reduce negative ones, and to ensure fair compensation. How to do that? Well, we would need to have a multi-dimensional feedback and coordination system, a multi-dimensional incentive and reward system, multi-dimensional money. And in principle, we can now build this, for example, with blockchain technology. We can integrate Internet of Things and blockchain technology to create new forces in our economic system geared towards the reuse of resources. In this way, a circular economy would eventually emerge through co-evolution. Of course, companies could earn money by reusing resources or by producing in environmental friendly ways, and of course, sharing economy would be an important part of that circular economy. I've been trying to drive this approach forward by integrating blockchain and Internet of Things at the Bio schools. There will be a new version of it in next spring called BESS, if you want to participate. Now, in principle, you can also apply those approaches for social self-organization. The idea is old, and we always admire those flocks of birds and think, wow, how do they do this? 300 years old, but it hasn't happened so far. Now with the Internet of Things, I believe, and other technology, we can make it happen. In fact, self-governance is efficient if you just have the right design principles. One of the examples often mentioned as an example of why we would need to have centralized control is tragedies of the commons. I don't agree. The point is that we know that These strategies of the commons happen in social dilemma situation. A prisoner's dilemma is just one example, and that these situations can be changed by decentralized social mechanisms. For example, we've shown how moral behavior would spread and free riding would disappear through peer punishment. But you don't need to use punishment. Well, if you have a competition of mechanisms, it turns out that altruistic signaling is actually superior to peer punishment. There are other approaches like success-driven migration, direct reciprocity, reputation systems, merit-based matching that really allow to promote cooperation in situations where it wouldn't happen by itself. Or also qualification, and basically give those people who use data and functionality responsible and for the better of humanity, like contributing to public goods, for example, give them more data access, more functionality, so eventually people could qualify to get to higher levels with more possibilities. Of course, we need to make sure that activities are sufficiently coordinated. And so the question is, what's the future of democracy? My personal take is it's all about boosting collective intelligence. I mean, bringing the best ideas of many minds together, collecting those arguments that matter for a complex problem, structure the arguments into different perspectives on a problem, because in a complex problem, one perspective is never enough to get a good picture of the problem, and then invite representatives of those different perspectives for a round table where they would try to come up with integrated perspectives and integrated solutions, first of all, that work for many people. Because the success principle of collective intelligence is that if you combine the best individual solution with inferior solutions, you would typically get a better solution. Very counterintuitive, but this is what happens. And that's why diversity wins, not the best. So you need to have those different perspectives. And so basically we should build platforms that support collective intelligence. This is what I believe digital democracy is about. Also, Evangelist is involved in a project called Digital Agora and Empower Polis with Mark Ballandis, where we are trying to go some steps into this direction. Now, with augmented reality and mixed reality, we could even go a step further, I believe. We could use AI and other systems in order to support our creativity, our cooperation with others. These systems could help us set up projects, find the right collaboration partners, recruit resources, schedule the activities, help us to spend the resources in the right way, coordinate all those activities, and so on. So basically, even without studying for 5 years, those systems could help you to get you in a semi-professional level by real-time instruction, basically. Similar as a robot learns from another robot through a robot cloud, right? I mean, this is what we should also do as humans, share our knowledge right away. So in a diverse world, we need to create interoperability, no question about this. Now, what if we would use super intelligence in the following way? Say, it listens to you, that's what we learned before, it's doing, we are being listened to anyway, so listens to you what you want to do and it figures out, this is a plan that's good for your health, okay, it would be supported. Say, this is a plan that's bad for somebody else or for the environment, it would not get the support by the AI system. This is something that would create cooperation, solidarity, would help the environment or whatever. It means has benefits for others, it would get a lot of support. So it would make it easier to succeed, in other words, by kind of this background support that you would maybe not even see. Just things would succeed more easily. The only concern I have over here is we could certainly do that, but still the system could be maybe too powerful and maybe get out of control. So personally, I prefer a decentralized approach that would do a very similar thing. And here is a patent that I'm trying to get proved, interaction support processor, and basically looking into different kind of scenarios where two people or two companies would interact with each other, or company in the nature, say. And so there could be four kind of situations. Lose-lose situations, which should of course be avoided. So basically what needs to be done is to create awareness, to warn people or companies that they shouldn't do it. A win-win situation, okay, similar thing, make people aware there's an opportunity out there, they can use it, you know. Why don't you do this? Of course, what you can still do is kind of create a value exchange to have a balanced win on both sides. Then there are win-lose situations, and in the case of a bad win-lose situation, one wins less than the other one loses. But the winner has an interest in exploiting the loser. So that's why we need to protect the potential loser from exploitation and prevent that interaction from happening, because altogether it's bad for the system. However, if you have a situation where the winner would win more than the loser would lose, then you could have a value transfer and turn that situation into a win-win situation. And all of that could be done by digital assistance, creating situational awareness, to support the interactions, and have called these different devices as social mirror, social adapter, social protector, social money. But of course, you can come up with anything that comes to mind. I do think that we need now to learn to discover, use, and combine the success principles underlying the different cultures. Every culture is full of them. In many cases, we just don't understand those success principles. We could have something like a cultural genome project or Culturepedia, where we really learn to benefit each other with those success principles. So I think in the future what will really matter is co-learning, co-creation, coordination, cooperation, and co-evolution. And you should be a game changer. You should change the rules of the game away from that monopoly that has worked well in the past but would now be disastrous for the future, into something much more cooperative, something that allows co-evolution. And so I think what matters is collective intelligence for society, combinatorial innovation for the economy, and empowerment of people through digital assistance. Thank you very much.